Good morning. Speaking of freedom, I got to free myself from that stand. Can't be confined in one place. Good morning, y'all. It's always so weird to hear that introduction because I'm like, who is that? That's not me. So good morning. It's really good to be here with you all again this morning on this beautiful morning. The rain stopped and the sun came out, so that's awesome. And this is the start of a new month, and so that means a new monthly theme, and our theme for July is paradox. An easy, simple theme. And paradox really is a natural part of life, and when we think about the more we can embrace that idea, the more we'll be able to discover solutions to major problems in the world, because we can get so often fixed on the idea that it's one thing or another that we can't see that there is also a both and that's possible. So I want to start off today by talking about what the heck is a paradox, right? It's not the butt of the old joke, what do you get when two MDs walk into a bar? Paradox, okay. It's not that, all right. I know, old, try the fish. So the word paradox comes from the ancient Greek, and it's the combination of the prefix para, which denotes beyond or outside of, with the verb doken, I don't know if that's the right way to pronounce it, which means to think. So that was used to form the word paradoxos, an adjective meaning contrary to expectation. And the ancient Greeks were well aware that a paradox can take us outside our usual way of thinking. And so that's what we're really talking about today, is how do we get outside of our habitual way of thinking. So from there, the Latin used it as a basis for a word, a noun paradoxum, and then to English we get to paradox. And the Cambridge Dictionary defines paradox as a situation or statement that seems impossible or is difficult to understand because it contains two opposite facts or characteristics, right? So two opposing ideas. And one of my favorite examples, and I was just talking with Margot about this morning, is from Charles Dickens, and it's the beginning paragraph. It's really actually the first sentence of A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going the other way. And so these seeming opposites are both true depending on the situation and the perspective of the person involved. So Tale of Two Cities is about the French Revolution told from the British perspective. So you can see that what's told in there is very different than the French Revolution told from the French perspective. And even from the French perspective, what gets told is different based on whether you're revolutionary, right, on the side of democracy, or a loyalist on the side of the monarchy. So seeming opposites, right? And so what this talk today is called the paradox mindset. So what the heck is a paradox mindset? It's the ability, which we all actually do all the time, they don't realize it, is to hold and consider two or more seemingly opposed ideas at the same time. And we kind of think that's not possible, right? And you'll see these memes on Facebook. You can't have love and fear at the same time. Well, actually, that's the definition of the word awe, right? So we can have more, we can feel and know more than one thing. And so if we can embrace this idea of paradoxical thinking, it actually can lead us to be more creative. And so it really requires the ability to oscillate or move back and forth among various ideas and views without clinging fast to one idea or view. Now this is easier said than done, right? So an example of this is we teach in Science of Mind that everything is one. It's all one. There's only one life. Yet we also teach that this oneness is infinite diversity. So how can we be one and infinitely diverse, right? To fully grasp this idea, we have to hold contradictory ideas and oscillate between them. All is one and all is different until we get really at a cellular soul level that oneness is not sameness. Because so often, we tend to think of oneness having to be sameness. And this is why you get the issue of people in New Thought saying, I'm colorblind. I don't see color, or we're all the same on the inside. We all bleed red, right? That's not a statement of oneness because it denies the reality of our experience. It's actually a statement of privilege, right? I can only see you if I ignore a major part of you. That's not really oneness, is it? That's meanness, and I can only see you if you're either like me, and if you're not like me, I have to pretend you are so I can see you. You can't be colorblind by choice, right? You can't not see skin color unless you're truly colorblind, and even then you see different shades, right? It's just mental gymnastics that says you're only okay if I pretend I don't see how you're different from me. Truly embracing oneness is saying I honor all of who you are as a complex human being. And to really live in a paradox mindset, we have to be willing to stay in the question and the mystery, rather than being stuck on finding the grand answer or absolute truth. So I want to ask you to have a little experiment right now. If you're comfortable, close your eyes. If you're not, keep them open. So just think right now of something you hold to be true, something you care deeply about, and something you think is self-evident. Just really get that, something that you just can't imagine anything other than that being the truth. Now take a moment to imagine someone who believes the exact opposite of what you believe about that same thing. And now take a moment to imagine what it would be like if you believed that truth, cared about it, and held it to be self-evident. And now take a moment to imagine a world where both things are true at the same time for different people. Does your brain hurt? So you can open your eyes again if they're closed and just take a moment to really, ponder that. I mean, there are things where I believe truth is truth, and it really is hard for me to see the other side, right? I don't understand at all. And maybe it's because I grew up with this. I don't understand at all and cannot even imagine people who hold grudges. I don't get it. I don't get this idea of being so pissed off at somebody that 20 years down the road, you still won't speak to them. It doesn't work in my head, but I know people like this. And for them, that's like, unless someone does X, I'm just going to hate them forever. And so it's one of those things where I have trouble imagining kind of the other side. I work on it. So if we think of that, this idea of how hard it is to maintain more than one truth at a time. And of course, 4th of July is Tuesday, so I had to bring that in because, we've got to talk about the holidays. So, and again, speaking of the French, we had our own revolution, right, in this country. And so on the July 4th, we celebrate what we call Independence Day, right? Independence from a tyrannical, crazy king, right, George III. And in the Declaration of Independence are enshrined these words that we probably all learned in grade school. We hold these truths to be self-evident, right? Self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, okay? This is self-evident, and it's oft-quoted, yet let's take a minute to look at this. First of all, it said men, and it didn't mean men in the sense of men as in humankind. It meant men as in men. It didn't just mean men as in men, it meant white men, as in white-skinned European-descended men, and not just white-skinned European-descended men, but white-skinned European-descended men who owned property. Those were the only ones who were created equal. And Christian, yes. So, and only certain kinds of Christian beyond that, right? We won't get into that whole discussion. Now, the very men who were writing this, because it was all men who wrote the Declaration, also owned slaves. Many of them, most of them, if not all of them. So at the same time this was being written that all men are created equal, people of African descent, and indigenous peoples across what was then called the New World, were being enslaved. So on the one hand, all men are created equal. On the other hand, as George Orwell wrote in Animal Farm, some are more equal than others. So two contradictory ideas that have been held to be true since the beginning of the United States, and we still hold these contradictory ideas now, right? The Supreme Court is now deciding who's equal and who's not equal, right? The Supreme Court has just decided that we should be colorblind, quote unquote, in admissions. And now it looks like it may head toward hiring, right? You can't take anything into account. It's also passing laws that make LGBTQ people less equal. So we have to start thinking about the ways that these paradoxes and contradictions affect real life. And the thing is, until we get clear on that, we can't change things. So we can and do hold contradictory ideas. And our ability to see this and begin to grapple with it is the only way we can grow and begin to think differently. We must become aware of our conditioned tendencies and realize we're products of our history and culture, our particular history and culture. And as we attempt to understand and make sense of our world and these inherent paradoxes, we have to realize that our attempts to understand are always guided more by tradition and thus prejudice than we're able to make explicit to ourselves. Right? We often talk about hidden beliefs, unconscious bias. These things are all in there. What this means is that it's impossible to become completely self-conscious of the ideas operating within us as we try to understand the world. We don't always know what we don't know, right? Because of this, the experience of truth leads not to certainty, I would argue, but to more questions and to the idea that the more we think we know, the more we run up against the limits of knowing. And the more we run up against those limits, the more we realize there are more questions. Until we finally get to the place where we become willing to eternally live in the question and the mystery rather than in the firm answer. Now, this doesn't mean we just sit back and do nothing because we'll never have the absolute truth or have all the answers. Rather, it means we must always be willing to expand our knowledge and to admit, as I'm fond of saying, I could be wrong. Okay. The other pieces in having a paradox mindset are empathy and compassion, or the ability to really get, as I try to get you to see in that demonstration, that just as deeply as I believe in what I believe and what I find self-evident, the person whose beliefs are diametrically opposed to mine also believes just as deeply their ideas are right. That doesn't mean I have to agree with or condone their beliefs, but if I can truly understand how strong those beliefs are, I can start from a place of understanding rather than opposition, and that's a starting point. So Michael Lerner, who started a movement called Tikkun and Tikkun Magazine, used to talk about this idea that if we can get to what's at the basic kernel that we each find true, so maybe we're diametrically opposed, but we find that at the very base, we both are two different groups are talking about we care about children. Maybe we disagree completely about how children should be raised and what should happen, but if we can get to that nugget of truth, maybe there's a place for dialogue, right? So if I then begin to look at social, cultural, and religious history that make up my views and their views and that limit my understanding of myself and the other person, then that we can start working on it. It's a lot, right? But if we go back to this notion of in the United States, some people are more equal than others, we have to remember that the Catholic Church decreed that indigenous peoples didn't have souls and therefore they could be killed with impunity, right? They don't have souls, not fully human. We had in the United States, in our Constitution, the 3/5 compromise, right? Enslaved peoples were only 3/5 of a human. So we have to remember that we have these ideas. We can't shy away from them, okay? So we have to begin to look at the social, cultural, historic, religious views that make up our mindset. But the truth is, if we say, as it says in the CSL Global Vision, that we want a world that works for everyone and for all of creation, these sorts of explorations are necessary. Because if we want a world that works for everyone, whose view of works are we using? We have to think about that. The world seems to be at a tipping point, or poised for a pendulum swing. After a period of expanding democracy after World War II and expanding social rights, there is a shift toward authoritarianism. Democracy is perhaps the most fragile form of government because it relies on the goodwill of the people being governed and of the people doing the governing. It relies on faith. As much as religion relies on faith, democracy relies on faith. And we don't have a perfect democracy in the United States. We never have, but we have worked toward it. Authoritarian governments rely on fear, creating and maintaining fear and creating scapegoats for that fear. Fear of the other is used as a means of controlling the populace. If we're busy being scared of each other, we won't pay attention to our rights being taken away. In fact, we'll support those rights being taken away as a way to assuage our fear. And this is happening right now. And here's the thing, fear has no place in a paradox mindset because what we fear, we avoid. The paradox is, it's only by looking at what we fear that we can truly embrace a paradox mindset. So we got a paradox within a paradox, right? We have to become aware of our unconscious biases, which again, as I mentioned, is really difficult to do. The complex history of our opinions, ideas, the conditioned tendency of our thought to run in certain pathways and avoid other pathways. We can't change what we won't see. So if we're not willing to do this, we can't change anything. Adrienne Marie Brown writes about this in her book, Emergent Strategy. She says, we have to become aware of patterns, our own patterns of being and the larger societal patterns that govern everything. Even as we are trying to create things, we are stuck in old ways of being. How many of you have tried to change habits and have not had very much success? Because habits are really rooted in our psyche and our soul. And so when we go against that, everything in us goes, no, I'm really comfortable with that, please, right? So it really takes becoming conscious of what is reinforcing that habit. What is underneath it, right? This is often why when we try to lose weight, we try to exercise, all these things we do, we end up going back to our old habits because we're not getting to the reasons underneath why we don't want to exercise, why we're just going to eat chocolate all day long, which I would do if I had it in the house. We don't really look at sort of what's underneath it, okay? So she writes, the pattern of the universe repeats at scale. There's a structural echo that suggests two things. One, that there are shapes and patterns fundamental to our universe, and two, that what we practice at small scale can reverberate to the largest scale. And she writes that when she was doing election organizing, she realized that Americans really don't know how to do democracy. We don't know how to make decisions together. You only have to look at what's happening in Congress right now. I don't care what your political persuasion. We had the McCain-Feingold bill a long time ago, which was a Republican and a Democrat coming together. We used to have people across the aisle joining together for legislation. That really doesn't happen now. We don't know how to make decisions together, how to create generative compromises, how to advance policies that center justice. Most of our movements are reduced to advancing false solutions, things we can get corporate or governmental agreement on, which don't actually get us where we need to be. And so she says this awareness led her to look at organizations more critically. So many of our organizations that are working for social change are structured in ways that reflect the status quo. Singular charismatic leaders, top-down structures, money-driven programs, and destructive methods of engaging conflict, unsustainable work culture, and little to no impact on the issues at hand. So these patterns are destructive, and we embody and internalize them, right? We have this whole thing now of side hustles, hustle culture, where you have your job, but then you have your side hustle, because it's not enough to work a job 60 or 70 hours a week. You got to have your side hustle that you're doing nights and weekends. So we have this idea, right? So she says that, what we do on a small scale transforms. So it's kind of similar to what we say in New Thought, transform yourself to transform the world. But that doesn't mean to get lost in yourself and only transform yourself. It means to see our own lives and work and relationships as a front line, a first place we can practice justice, liberation, and alignment with each other and our planet. The truth is, we can't do any of this without embracing a paradox mindset. Transformation, both personal and global, requires the ability to question, receive knowledge, to keep questioning, keep learning, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep questioning. Because here's the deal. It's nice to post on Facebook thoughts and prayers, but thoughts and prayers don't do anything. Posting on Facebook, putting signs in your yard, doesn't do anything. You have to get your butt out of your seat and actually engage in community in the life if you want things to change. If you want to create a world that works for everyone, you have to get uncomfortable. One of the paradoxes, right, people say life begins at the end of your comfort zone. How many of you regularly get outside of your comfort zone? How many of you regularly talk to people you don't know? Make a point to search out people who are different from you and have conversations with them? How many of you are willing to talk to an unhoused person on the street? Right? How many of you are willing to go to a church that's different than yours and engage those people in conversation? Not most of us in here. So it's something to think about. The more we stay stuck in comfort and stay stuck in only the status quo, the less able we are to live in this paradox mindset, and the less able we are to make changes in our own lives and the lives of other people. So I want to come back at the end to what Lauren read from Mark Nepo. One reliable way to listen is to keep what is true before us. And so that idea of keeping what is true before us is not truth with a small t, it's true with a capital T. We can't do this all the time because we're human. Remember, we're fallible. We're going to screw up all the time. Maybe you don't. I do every day. I make mistakes all day long. I say things come out of my mouth that after they come out, I realize are hurtful. Things come out of my mouth that are irritable because I'm in a bad mood or I didn't get enough sleep or I'm not paying attention, right? I'm human. So this is not about not being human. It's about admitting our humanity and dealing with it. So the practice of being human centers on the courage to return to what is life-giving. Returning to what matters involves setting aside our preconceptions and opinions so we can listen to life directly. Right? How many of you, when I said talking to an unhoused person, the first thing in your mind was crazy, dirty, drunk? Right? Somebody on the street who doesn't have a house is as much of a human as you are. So when we think of this idea of some people being less than because of their situation, we're getting into that mindset that cannot see a paradox. When we can meet life with an open heart, receiving becomes indistinguishable from giving. We learn to live from that place of grace, right? So this week, I invite you to play with embracing a paradox mindset. Practice empathy and compassion, which, by the way, is not the same thing as pity and sympathy. Saying, there but for the grace of God go I, is not compassion. That's judgment. Because it's saying, I've got the grace of God, but you don't. Because if you had the grace of God, you wouldn't be where you are. It's not saying, I know what's in your consciousness, I can see the truth of you. That's pity. That's saying my consciousness is better than yours, and if you had my consciousness, you wouldn't be where you were. So ask yourself, what questions am I asking? What am I not seeing? What is it that I don't know? And how do I begin knowing what I don't know? Who am I not seeing for who they are? Who am I pretending is not different than me because if I see them for who they are, it makes me so uncomfortable I can't take it. Right? Where are you not questioning the status quo? And how comfortable can you get with discomfort? If you want to take a baby step into being uncomfortable, switch up your morning routine. Just switch up your morning routine, and you'll get uncomfortable really fast, many people. Right? Drive a different way someplace. But really get clear that until we can get comfortable with being uncomfortable, until we can begin to see there's more than one way to look at the world, we can't get anywhere. Remember, the Nazis had God is on our side on their belt buckles, right? Remember that many Christians think Catholics aren't real Christians, when in fact Catholicism was one of the earliest forms of Christianity, right? Remember that the Southern Baptist Convention just voted that the Bible says women can't be pastors, so they disfellowshipped any Baptist congregation that has women as pastors. These are beliefs, right? These are ideas of what is true. They're not true. They're just opinion. So get clear on what you believe is true that is really just opinion. Because you know what they say, opinions are like, everybody's got one. And they all stink. There you go. Thanks, Lauren. Ba-dum-bum. All right. So again, This might have been a heavier talk than you were looking at, but there are some people that comfort the disheartened. I'm the one that discomforts the heartened, so. That's just my nature. Well, at least that's my opinion of myself. It could be different. All right, let's go into prayer. So I just take this moment to anchor into what I know is true. That in the midst of it all, there is one. In the midst of all the opinions, all the ideas, all the beliefs, there is indeed only one life. One universal cosmic isness that is in, through, and as all. That exists as all. From the smallest subatomic particle to the farthest reaches of the universe, there is that one. And I know that one this moment as freedom. I know it as love. I know it as curiosity. I know it as wisdom and clarity and creativity. This and so much more is the truth of the one. And as I know that is the truth of the one, I declare it is the truth of me and the truth of each person hearing the sound of my voice. For there is that within each of us that knows and knows that it knows that there is that one life, that we are each joined as that one, that there is no one else and nothing else, no place else to go. For there is indeed only the divine looking at the divine, beholding each of us as that divine emanation. And the only paradox is that we don't see that. For that one embraces all seeming opposites, all seeming oppositions. It embraces all possibility, all freedom. And I know that and claim that for each of us here, for this community, as that place of goodness, that place of love, that place of acceptance. Declaring that the only thing that exists is the holy question, the grand mystery of life, that ever-expanding cosmic consciousness that is inside each of us, knowing that the universe only says yes, yes, and yes. And I simply give thanks for that, give thanks for this beloved community, give thanks for this ability to be here, to speak, and to know. And giving thanks, I simply release this word into that perfect action of the law, knowing it is so. And I allow it to be by saying, and so it is.